we'll start off with few acts and other things which were from before the constitution. If you go to the acts and all, it all starts from which act? The Regulating Act of 1773. Why was this act particularly passed? It was aimed at what? Reforming the administration of the British East India Company. And the most important thing that you need to understand here is the Regulating Act elevated the Governor of Bengal to the position of Governor of Bengal with the Executive Council of 4 members to assist him. They were required to function according to the majority rule. So a question will come, it was based on consensus. Any question adugutar. But what would be the answer? It is based on not consensus, based on the majority rule where the Executive Council was added by 4 members. This is one of the major. And second is, it made the governors of Bombay and Madras subordinate to the Governor General. What does it mean? Did it result in centralization or decentralization? It means it is basically leading to centralization. So he will give a statement. The Regulating Act of 1773 further centralized the administrative structure in India. So the statement would be a right statement. Then this established a central authority over the presidencies of Madras and Bombay. So it further what you call exemplifies that it led to centralization. The Supreme Court at Calcutta, the Regulating Act established a Supreme Court at Fort Williams in Calcutta, Chief Justice and 3 other judges. Judges came from England. So what does it mean? All the judges were primarily the Britishers. So he will give a statement, 1 Indian judge was involved. So that would be a wrong statement, right? And the court had both civil and criminal jurisdiction over the British subjects, not Indian natives. What does it mean? What does it mean? What is this differentiation of British subject and not Indian natives? Who are these British subjects? You mean to say the working professionals of the East India Company, the employees of East India Company? You getting my point? So here the British subject does not mean the Indians. So this particular court which was established at Calcutta, that had the civil and criminal jurisdiction over the British subjects and not the Indian natives. This is a very big point that can confuse you in the examination hall, because you will feel obviously the Indian natives would come under the purview of that Supreme Court that was established. Now, the Regulating Act 73 prohibited company servants from engaging in private trade or accepting bribes aiming to curb corruption. So what he will bring? The company matters related to corruption were tightened under the 1773 Act. This would be the statement. He would try to simplify the statement in 4 or 5 words, right? Then the Act tried to bring administrative corrections in the functioning of the East India Company. So he will use any language like that, right? Then the Act strengthened the British government's control over the company by requiring the Court of Directors to report on revenue, civil and military affairs. What he will do? Civil and revenue matters only. Any word is there. So what does it mean? He skipped the military affairs. So you should know that the revenue, the civil and also the military affairs were the purview of the 1773 Act. Then very important, the Regulating Act limited the company's dividends to 6% until it repaid a government loan and restricted the terms of Court of Directors to 4 years. So this is very important, where the dividends that were paid to the shareholders of the East India Company was restricted to 6% and the surplus money was used for paying the debts of the British government. So this is one of the important things which is part of the Regulating Act. See, one question will come, if you are lucky, 2 questions will come from all the pre-independence acts of India. So, but because it is very closely related to each other, you should not get confused. That's the idea. Okay? So, after this, we had a small act of settlement of 1781. also known as the Act of Settlement in 1781, which was passed to address the conflicts between the Supreme Court and the Supreme Council in colonial India. Which was the Supreme Council? Which was the Supreme Council? Okay? So there was a conflict between the Supreme Court and the Supreme Council. To address that conflict, the Settlement Act of 1781. The conflict settlement between the court and the Supreme Council. This was the purpose of this particular act. What it says, it established clearer governance frameworks and enhanced the judicial processes. So what does it mean? In some ways, it tilted towards the judiciary. So this is the message. Then the Governor General Council were exempted from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for the acts done in the official way. So what has happened? They got an complete exemption. It excluded the matters related to revenue from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. And one last thing, it even exempted the servants of the company from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for their official exemptions. So what has happened? They got judicial impunity. So what he will use a statement, the company officials got judicial impunity under the Settlement Act of 1781. It is a correct statement. It is a correct statement. So understand that. Then it provided that the Supreme Court should have the jurisdiction over all the inhabitants. It also asked the court to administer the personal laws of the defendants. Who are these defendants? Prosecutioners and defendants. Personal laws. What are these personal laws? Matters related to culture, religion, marriage, inheritance, everything should be taken care of by the Supreme Court. It says it laid down that appeals from the provincial courts could be taken to the Governor General in Council but not to the Supreme Court. So what has happened? The provincial courts appeals would not lie in the Supreme Court but would lie in the Supreme Council. So where does the appeals of the High Court lie today? Obviously to the Supreme Court, right? There are conditions when you can go for an appeal to the Supreme Court. Not that you cannot go to appeal to Supreme Court as a matter of right. I hope you are aware. We'll talk about it when we come to the Supreme Court chapter. But now, as per the Settlement Act 1781, the appeal from the provincial court judgments lied not in the Supreme Court but in the Supreme Council. That's very important. It empowered the Governor General in Council to frame rules and regulations for the provincial courts and councils. So what has happened here? The administration is controlling the judiciary. So do you see separation of powers here? No. So the Act 1781 goes against the spirit of the separation of powers. Statement will come. It means it is a right statement because the powers of the court were largely curtailed here, right? Then the above saying proves that the Act of Settlement was the first attempt in India towards the separation of executive from the judiciary by defining the respective areas of jurisdiction. This is what he is making a statement exactly opposite, in the sense when he is actually what happening? He is giving the council the power to rules and regulations for the provincial courts and the council. So he is making a statement separately, but on ground what is happening? On ground what is happening? Centralization is happening and not separation is happening. So you need to be very, very careful with the words that he will use according to the the Act of 1781. Primarily an act of settling the disputes between the Supreme Court and the Supreme Council. And very, very importantly, the provincial courts, any judgments given by them lied as a matter of right for appeal under the Supreme Council and not to the Supreme Court. And the Governor General's Council to frame the rules and regulation for the provincial courts and also to the provincial council. So the Governor General in Council became the controlling authority according to the 1781 Settlement Act. Then we come to very important act called the Pitt India Act of 1784. Why was the Pitt India Act basically enacted? What was the agenda? The failure of the regulating act failed in few ways. Basically, the presidencies of Bombay and Madras were to be subordinated to the Governor General. So, what it became again? Is it going towards the spirit of federation or against the spirit of federation? It is going against the spirit of federation. It included the following. What it said? The Pitt India Act 1784 gave the British government control over the East India Company, making it a subordinate to the state. So what has happened? The control on the East India Company started kind of with the Pitt India Act of 1784. And you know, as per the 1858 Act, what happened? The company rule was all completely abolished and the British Crown assumed the ownership and the powers, giving few exemptions of trade to the East India Company, like trading in tea, silk, porcelain and all. So the control on the East India Company started with the Pitt India Act of 1784, right? Now, the company's territories in India were called British possessions. So, whatever territories the company was holding, they started to be referred as the British possessions in the Pitt India Act. The Act created a 6-member board of control to regulate the Indian affairs and the East India Company, which included the Secretary of the State and Chairman and the Chancellors of the Exchequer and 4 other members appointed by the Crown. So now, very important, this word will keep appearing repeatedly in the context. The Board of Control. This was the board created with the primary intention to control all the affairs of the East India Company. Primarily a board of 6 members, right? 6 members board of control to regulate the Indian affairs and the East India Company, which included the Secretary of the State, who was the chairman, the Chancellor of the Exchequer and 4 other members. The Chancellor of the Exchequer is like a treasurer. You have treasurer nowadays, no? So he is like the treasurer of the board of control, because when you see future acts, the board of control almost completely controls the affairs of the East India Company. That we will see. Okay? Then the board had broad authority to oversee all the civil, military and revenue matters of East India Company. It accessed all company papers and to approve all the dispatches. What is this dispatch? Any document that has to be sent to the British Parliament, it had to be approved by the Board of Control, right? The dual control, the Pitt India Act 1784 separated the East India Company's commercial and political roles. The company kept its commercial activities while the British government through a board of control managed its political and administrative affairs, creating a double government system. Here he is talking about political. If you see here, he is taking care of everything. So what he is saying, without me knowing, you will not send anything, and your political affairs I will completely control. It means oversight on the civil military affairs and complete control on the political affairs. So that you need to understand. So confusing statement may come and you will get confused. 1784. And the Governor General's authority, the Pitt India Act 74, reduced the number of members in the council in India to 3 from the earlier, how many members? 4 members were there earlier. Now it reduced to 3. It included the Commander-in-Chief in the council. Means that 4 members included the Commander-in-Chief in the council. The Pitt India Act required the civil and military officers to disclose information about their properties. In India and Britain, corrupt officers were entitled to harsh penalties. So what they will do, they will give you, he will make a statement, consider the following statements related to Pitt India. He will give 3 to 4 statements and he may ask you to identify either how many or which of the above are the correct answers. If he asks you how many, it is very difficult, because in that case you should know almost all the answers. If he asks you which of the above, there is a chance to make a guess. But be rest assured, the Board of Control's creation happens, and the Board of Control controls all the civil, military and revenue matters of this thing, and the political role was taken away from the company affairs, and the British controlled the political affairs almost directly after the 1784. And the Executive Council reduced from members from 4 to 3, which included the Commander-in-Chief also. This is the broad provision of the Pitt's India Act of 1784. Now comes the 1786 Regulating Act, which was significant piece of legislation passed to address the issues in the British India. What issues? Extension of the Governor General's powers. What it did? The Act enhanced the authority of the Governor General of India, enabling him to override the decisions of the Council in critical matters. Now, in some way, Council was a representative body in some way, at least a broader body. But now, in critical matters, the Governor General can override the what you call decision of the Council. So it became further centralization of the powers. Then it established the position of the Governor General as the supreme authority in India, giving him greater powers to manage the affairs of the British East India Company, what you call, more effectively. The Act mandated that the Governor General should be assisted by a council of 4 members, ensuring that decisions were not made unilaterally. So again from 3 to what it became? 4. And then focus on military and administrative reforms, the Governor General as the Commander-in-Chief. We saw in the previous Pitt's India Act, there was a separate Commander-in-Chief. Now what they did? The authority of Commander-in-Chief was bestowed on the Governor General himself. So more centralization of authority happened as part of the Regulating Act of 1786.